revolution that erupted on the 14th of February 2011. But we are also marking generally the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring that also erupted that year, a few weeks before the Bahraini revolution. But we saw also the revolutions in Egypt, the revolution in Tunisia, and in Yemen, and of course in Bahrain, and of course in other places. Generally, there was a unanimous verdict by the big powers, whether in the Arab world or outside the Arab world, to ensure that these revolutions did not work, because they have always wanted the status quo to continue, to prevail. The people do not want, and they have never wanted, and they still do not want the status quo to continue, because it means repression, it means dictatorship, it means the lack of people's power to express themselves, to take their own stance, and to make their own policies. That is a prohibited area for most of the Arab countries, most of the Arab people. So when they erupted in the various means, the various styles of resistance, it was a unanimous move that we had not seen for decades, since the 50s. So we had that Arab Spring, and we saw how it was repressed mercilessly. And we only need to look at what happened to the people of Bahrain to deduce how strong and how repressive the attack was. We saw how our forces were used not for the defense of the country or the borders, but for the repression of the people. We saw that many people as martyrs were killed. In Egypt, in Tunisia, and in Bahrain, we saw from the first day, the moment the revolution erupted on the 14th of February 2011, the first martyr fell, Ali Abdul Hadi Mshema, on the first day. And then we had Fadil Matrouk and others to follow, to the extent that we had more than 200 people being killed mercilessly in the streets. Of course, subsequently, we saw people executed, people tortured to death inside their cells. So here today, we are marking many things. We are marking the awareness of the people. We are marking the willingness of the people to sacrifice in order to achieve their aims. We are marking the unfortunate support by the Western countries of those regimes and their opposition to any change in the status quo. We are also marking the mothers who had, and sisters, of course, and wives who lost their loved ones. We have many. We have many people in Bahrain today who are widowed. We have many who live with one eye only because they were shot in one eye. They lost, some of them lost two eyes, but at least 50 or 60 people live with one eye. We also have more than 200 martyrs, as we said, and we had about 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 at some stage prisoners. Now, at this moment of time, we have about 1,300. 1,300 is political prisoners is a large number. It's not a joke. 1,300 people languishing behind bars is not something that we can ignore. So it is there. We are marking all of these, and luckily we have good speakers today. Speakers who either are knowledgeable of the situation, part of it, or are sympathizers with the people of Bahrain, supporters of democracy, supporters of freedom, and they are all well appreciated and thanked and respected because they have a lively conscience, they have hearts, they have feelings, they have human touches in their minds and their hearts. So welcome all to attend, and also I also thank those who are going to speak. And of course, all of you will have the chance to speak if you have anything to say, any sincere word will be much appreciated by our people. Not only by our people, but also by any people who loves freedom, who values freedom. And I don't know how to start. We have four main speakers. Dr. Mark Owen Jones, who had agreed to speak, but because he is outside this country, he is teaching at Doha in Qatar. We asked him to send us his speech in order not to get engaged and entangled in these technological problems. So he recorded it and we received it from him last night. Mark Owen Jones has a book on Bahrain, the Bahrain Revolution. It is a good compilation of the engagements of the people in the revolution of Bahrain. So we have Dr. Mark Owen Jones. We have Ali Abdul Imam, a former detainee before the revolution, only few days, and the first 2-3 weeks of the revolution, I think he was still in jail, but then he was freed and he managed to sneak out of the country. He is a blogger. He was tortured. He is a live witness of what happens behind bars. And we have our friend Loti, who's a policy and advocacy associate with BIRD, Bahrain Institute for Rights and Democracy. Thank you for being with us and for your support. And of course, our veteran supporter who has been here with us for a long time, Professor Rodney Shakespeare, who in the year 2000, if you remember, you established this organization called ARRAIN. ARRAIN means to catch somebody and bring him to jail. ARRAIN the torturers. At that time we had one day. Yeah, that was what will happen one day. So he was motivated at the time by the arrest of many people, including Ali Abdul Imam, and of course we had Ja'far Hisabi and others. He knew them, so he was so moved by that, even that he instituted his own body called ARRAIN. So our thanks to our friend, lifelong friend, and he has always been committed to the cause of freedom everywhere. So let us start with Mark Owen Jones, Dr. Mark Owen Jones, whose speech has been recorded a few hours ago.
Hello everyone. Firstly, thank you for inviting me to this really important event, and secondly, I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person. Of course, it would be great to meet so many of you. But I just want to say a few things on this important anniversary of February the 14th. I think as an academic who has studied Bahrain and its history, I remain saddened but unfortunately unsurprised at the current state of affairs in the country. I think it's really important to note that there remain hundreds of political prisoners inside Bahrain's jail. The political space has shrunk. We've seen democratic backsliding since 2011. And this is particularly ironic given that, the peaceful protests that started back in February 2011 were designed to increase the democratic space. Unfortunately, the counter-revolutions led by the Al Khalifa regime with the support of Western allies, in particular the US and the UK, has put an end to that, at least in the short term. We've seen the banning of political parties. We've seen new laws designed to criminalize forms of behavior that should constitute freedom of speech. And we've seen numerous, I would say, abuses of power. I think for me, despite all these very clear and egregious violations of human rights, what troubles me, I think, is the lack of justice. And I want to talk about the lack of justice and the lack of transparency over the past 13 years. I think one of the things that the ruling regime have successfully been able to do for so long is somehow convince the world, again, its allies, that it's undertaken sufficient reforms and that those reforms are meaningful. But one of the key things I think that's motivated, protests in Bahrain is the sheer lack of accountability for those who have been complicit in violence and torture against Bahraini subjects for so long. We saw this, of course, in 2001 with the passing of the law that basically gave impunity to those who had engaged in torture prior to 2001, including in the 1990s Intifada and even before. But the Bassiouni report of 2011 gave a form of PR and propaganda cover to the Bahrain regime, who said they would implement these reforms to conduct, changes that included holding police officers accountable. And I think this is one of the biggest deceits that we've seen over the past decade, is the facade of justice, the facade of the lack of accountability. We saw low-level officers being prosecuted. There was a very clear pattern in that. Firstly, high-level officers weren't really touched, or high-level ministers weren't touched. And the so-called rotten apples were put in front of judges. Now, this is obviously a strategy used by regimes around the world to avoid accountability, to avoid the notion or avoid the accusation that this kind of violence is systematic and systemic. It comes from the top. And the way you get around that is to actually make it seem that the violations and the human rights abuses that have taken place are only the result of a few bad apples, low-ranking policemen, in Bahrain's case, many of whom are not from Bahrain or have been naturalized citizenship in exchange for loyalty to the regime. And I think this, to me, is one of the most egregious developments. And those who have been prosecuted, there's often very little evidence to suggest that they've actually served time in prison. So I think this, to me, is a travesty and needs to be highlighted. That is in, of course, addition to the plight of many political prisoners who remain behind bars. The reason I want to focus on impunity for the purpose of this anniversary is that I think it's also a very tangible, very real aspect of something that can be campaigned around. And I think it's something that really implicates the Bahrain's allies, who historically have played a really important role in determining what goes on in Bahrain. But also I wanted to talk about it because I think it has historical ties throughout the decades. We've seen so many examples, and now with the historical records open, or at least some of them, we can see examples of where the British embassy in Bahrain, for example, in the 70s, has deliberately hidden evidence about Britain's knowledge of human rights abuses in the Bahraini police and army from Parliament in the UK. Some of these things I document in my book and other research. And we obviously know that people like Colonel Ian Henderson, the so-called Butcher of Bahrain, who was in Kenya before Bahrain, were investigated but let off. In my case, I even have requested the documents about Ian Henderson's case. His case was actually referred to the Crown Prosecution Service. I requested that they give up these documents because the Crown Prosecution Service says that these boxes of evidence did not constitute or they did not meet the standard or threshold necessary to launch a prosecution of Ian Henderson. And what's really interesting about this is when I did my request, they acknowledged the existence of these boxes, in some cases sending me some rather useless press clippings that I already had, but they ultimately refused to send me them. So I think as well for activists, there's information out there that we can get our hands on or that should be gotten hold of that can start the process of trying to uncover the lack of accountability in Bahrain's police. I think also systemically rooted in Bahrain's colonial history, although I think there is also a culture of impunity that is separate from that colonial history. But this carried on through the 90s as well, and we know there was British police working in the Bahraini police. So I think there's a lot to be done on the intersection of the violence of Bahrain's security forces, which again goes right to the top, and the UK. And I think if we can successfully campaign and put pressure on the government to try and get some level of historic accountability, I think then we can use this as a platform for getting, or at least trying to get some more pressure on current issues of accountability in Bahrain. That over the past 13 years, and particularly since 2011, the fact that British police and British military have helped train the Bahrain security forces shows that there is a level of not just complicity, but level of overrule that still exists. I think it's really important to draw attention to this continuity, because I think every time there are these huge violations of human rights in Bahrain and these brutal crackdowns, there's always this attempt to frame something as a new beginning. Here we have the new beginning of 2001 with the reforms that were brought in, which were a deceit, but there was something. Then in 2011 we had the BICI report, which was, again, a deceit. And, you know, I don't know what the next deceit will be, but these new beginnings are not new beginnings. On the contrary, they are just ways of trying to whitewash the past, get impunity for officials, and to sweep the systemic and systematic violence of the regime under the carpet. And I think, you know, I don't want to end with a negative message, but I want to end on a positive, because the history has shown us that Bahrainis, you know, they know justice, they know democracy, and that's what they want. And there will only be so much the ruling regime can do to stop that happening. But I would certainly wish upon the British government in particular that they are not partners in the brutal crackdown of peaceful democratic movements that simply want more autonomy and more self-rule. So thank you again for having me, and thank you for listening, and I'm wishing you a successful and great event.
Thanks are due to our friend, Dr. Mark Owen Jones, who, he took the effort to record his speech, and it is concise, to the point, and up to date. So our thanks go to him. And now we will listen to our friend Ali Abdul Imam, who, as I told you earlier, he is a former prisoner and a blogger, and he was in charge of an important website at that time when there were not many websites in the 90s and the early 2000s, called Bahrain Online. It was very useful. It was central to the revolution. It was from there that all the writings and messages were sent just prior to the revolution on the 14th of February. So he was in charge of that, and this is why he was persecuted for a long time. So Ali, please go ahead.
Thanks for inviting me to this event. It's an important event, especially we are going through this for the past 13 years with the struggling of the people of Bahrain. I'll be talking about my personal experience of what happened, which might explain why this uprising actually happened in Bahrain and in other Arab countries as well, because the situation is the same, the dreams of the youth is the same, the injustice that's going on is the same, the corruption on the regimes is the same. So as Dr. Saeed mentioned, I've been running my website, which is Bahrain Online. It was an open portal that everybody can report his own story. But the main theme of that website is against the government, and it's exposing the corruption, exposing the injustice, and that's made the regime or the government is annoyed by that website, which lead them to arrest me 2 times. The first one was in 2005, but because of the international community pressure, they released me after 2 weeks. But in September 2010, I've been arrested among many other activists, human rights defenders, clerics, and others. And there are around 500 activists being arrested at that time, and the situation was like a security storm on the people, so they silenced everybody. We've been tortured, severely tortured inside prison. We've been humiliated, and the things we've been hearing is the previous era is ended. There is no freedom. There is nothing coming on as a reform or anything. You will be staying here for 10, 15 years. Actually, they were informing individuals that you will be charged with 15 years. You will be charged with 10 years. They were individually telling others. Among them, there are many human rights and many clerics. So I'll just try to wrap it because of the time. But when the Arab Spring started, and it's reached to Bahrain in February 2011, the amount of people going to the street was huge. The people was insistent on doing the change because they were tired of keep repeating the uprising from every 10 years. Every new generation we have a new uprising. So people were insistent in 2011, and the pressure they put it on the government was too huge, so they have to release us, actually most of us. And I've been released, I think, in 23rd of February, but it lasted only for 3 weeks because in 15 March, when the Saudi Arabia army entered Bahrain and started the crackdown of the uprising in Bahrain, I have to go into hiding for 2 years because my house was raided again, and I was sentenced to 15 years by a military court at that time. The charge that I've been facing either in 2010 or what I read about it in 2011 is that we as a group of 20-something people are planning to overthrow the regime, and we've been meeting. And the tools that we use to do that is the website, which is Bahrain Online, by just broadcasting or publishing some press release. And I'm not sure how a regime will be overthrown by just a press release published on a website, even it's not on the street or anything. The situation after I've been released in 23rd of February, I went directly from my prison into the persecutor. I didn't go to my home. It's just at 2 a.m. I remember. I went directly to the persecutor. I want to see what's the situation that we've been hearing about it from inside the jail. You can see a dream in the eyes of the people, of the youth, that they have this hope, a great hope that a new era is coming, a new face of our country with justice, with freedom, with everybody equal, is coming to this country. I can see that the mass protest happening, they were all peacefully and they all chanting. Their demand is very simple. We need the freedom of expression. We need justice, a fair distribution of the wealth, participating in the power. All of these are not allowed for the people of Bahrain. We have a royal family who are controlling all the aspects of the country. You are not allowed to change anything because they manipulate or they are controlling all the game inside the regime. So if you think you can change from inside the regime, you are dreaming, because all the rules, all the powerful tools is controlled by the royal family. And that's a wrong situation. And that's why the uprising is happening. The uprising happening because there is something wrong in the country and need to be addressed or need to be justified. It's not just people going into the street and dying, being shot, being tear gassed, being tortured just for nothing. No, they notice that there are something wrong in this country and they need to address it, they need to change it. But because of the regional intervention in the situation, and the army of United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia entered Bahrain, the crackdown was something that we never witnessed, we never read about it in the history of Bahrain. I mean, we've been into many different, I personally experienced 2 uprisings in Bahrain in 90s and in 2011. I never witnessed the violence committed by the regime or by the forces like what happened in 2011. And that's what forced the government to bring Basuni committee to investigate. The current situation now is the same. There are, as mentioned, around 1,300 political prisoners. The systematic discrimination still exists and strongly. You can notice it in the media, in the army, in the education. I mean, our kids are learning in their school that that you have a wrong faith and you are kafir and you need to change your faith. They are 6, 7 years old and they are hearing these lessons from their teachers. So the current situation in Bahrain is very bad. We have a very mental health issues among those who've been released or among the prisoners. We have, as mentioned, 1,300 prisoners. It's okay to talk about the pain, and I mean, it's not okay. I mean, it's hard to talk about the pain that people are suffering, but the need of the solution is the most important thing. To guarantee that the basic human rights for the people of Bahrain is respected. The justice is existed in Bahrain. I mean, it's not fair for the people of Bahrain just to suffer because of the international game or from the different influencer playing the role on not bringing the solution in Bahrain. I think I'll be just ending here, but I'm hoping by next year we will not only talking about remembering the situation of Bahrain and remembering the pain of our people as much as maybe celebrating the victory and celebrating the change that delivered to the people of Bahrain, because this is what is, I believe, the demands of the people of Bahrain, the demand of the prisoners, the demand of every person who love the peace and love the justice broadcasting or distributed around the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ali. It gave us a taste of the sort of treatment that is prevalent, and unfortunately, this treatment is not just in the past. Until today, people are arrested. Until the last few days, because people are still going out in the streets because of Gaza now, the Gaza situation. In the last 2-3 months, people never stopped. Almost every day there were the protests. They mix their own domestic problems with those of Gaza, and they compare themselves to the Palestinians. So almost every day, in order to deter people from taking part, they arrest people. They arrest young people, young 16, 15 years of age, and they go there. Sometimes they sentence them to 6 months, sometimes to a week, sometimes to 2 years. So it is just arbitrary sentencing, but it's still going on. Thank you, Ali, again for reminding us of this harsh situation. And let us go now to our friend Loti, who is Loti Casey, who is a policy and advocacy associated with the Bahrain Institute for Rights and Democracy in London. And probably this is the first time you address such a meeting, and it is our pleasure to welcome you. So let us welcome Loti in a proper manner.
Thank you very much. So this Wednesday will mark the 13th anniversary of the 2011 mass uprising in Bahrain, when people took to the streets to demand change and to call for an end to the brutal Al-Khalifa dictatorship. 13 years on, the dictatorship remains because it used a heavy hand to crush dissent and has left a string of broken promises for reform. There are many ways to measure how the human rights situation has deteriorated during the last 13 years. Today I will look at the treatment of political prisoners and the false promises made by the regime as it continues to flagrantly violate its citizens' human rights. Bahrain continues to hold human rights defenders arbitrarily for their role in the 2011 uprising and then subjects them to discriminatory and harsh treatment. Hassan Mashema and Dr. Abdul Jali Al-Singles are two key figures who are subjected to physical and psychological torture by Bahraini authorities and are serving a life sentence following an unfair trial. On the 3rd of April, Dr. Al-Singles will complete 1,000 days of a solid food hunger strike that he began after authorities confiscated his research manuscripts. They could just simply return these to his families and bring an end to the whole ordeal. However, they continue to refuse to do so. Hassan Mashema is Bahrain's oldest political prisoner. He's aged 76. Last year, his health deteriorated alarmingly, but authorities have denied him access to his medical information and records. Despite being held in a medical facility since July 2021, both Mashema and Al-Singace have been subjected to medical negligence, held in prolonged solitary confinement, and denied access to sunlight. Hassan Mashema and Dr. Al-Singace are not the only political prisoners being treated appallingly by Bahraini authorities. Last August, hundreds of political prisoners launched a hunger strike at Bahrain's jail prison, the largest prison in Bahrain, to protest the harsh treatment of many prisoners. With over 800 inmates joining the strike over 36 days, it was the biggest hunger strike in the history of Bahrain's prisons. This month also marks 10 years since the arrests of death row inmates Mohammed Ramadan and Hassan Musa, who were sentenced to death following an unfair trial based on confessions extracted under horrific torture. They have exhausted all their rights to appeal and are at imminent risk of execution, along with 26 other prisoners on death row. New human rights investigations and laws and bodies have been set up over the past 13 years, masquerading as genuine human rights progress. For example, the government announced that they were appointing a child rights commissioner and keep pointing to their new juvenile laws as proof that they are interested in protecting and promoting the interests of children in Bahrain. However, our research suggests that there are at least 42 individuals in jail prison who were convicted and sentenced to long prison terms for crimes committed when they were minors between 2012 and 2017. This includes Hayden Mallah, who was arrested in 2015 at the age of 16 and sentenced to 23 years in prison. In jail, the systematic denial of medical care has caused his health to decline significantly, and he has suffered serious health problems which have not been adequately treated. These include losing 8 of his teeth without replacement, making eating difficult, and suffering internal bleeding, which caused him to vomit blood. You might be thinking, surely the UK is aware of Bahrain's appalling treatment of political prisoners and is making the necessary representations. The answer is, of course, far from this. Despite Bahrain's appalling rights record, the UK continues to funnel millions in taxpayer money on technical assistance to the country through the GSF, the Gulf Strategy Fund, formerly known as the Integrated Activity Fund, despite evidence that it has supported institutions, including the Bahrain Interior Ministry and the Ombudsman, which have been implicated in torture, the misuse of the death penalty, and the repeated whitewashing of abuses. It is clear from the examples that I have highlighted today that there has been little progress in Bahrain over the last 13 years. Many political prisoners, who should never have been arrested to begin with, are subject to repeated violations of their human rights, including medical negligence, which has dangerous impacts on their physical and mental health. And the authorities continue to view protest against this as white noise. Reform continues to act as a barely concealed smokescreen for shocking violations of international human rights protocol, as in the adult sentencing of children. Despite this, the UK continues to coddle its ally, propping up the instruments of repression in Bahrain, becoming complicit in the fact that, even 13 years on, it remains treacherous to call for human rights and democracy in Bahrain. Thank you.
Thank you, Loti. You have touched upon very sensitive areas, torturing minors, underage. Many of them were arrested, many of the current prisoners were arrested when they were underage, under 16 years of age, and they continue to be there. We have the Dry Dock prison, which contains, I don't know how many, 400, 500 political prisoners, and mainly they were children when they were underage, under 18, under 16. So this is the country. This is a country that is supported wholeheartedly by number 10, by the British government, despite our appeals to the government here, through our MPs, through our communications, our activists. But our cause have always fallen on deaf ears, unfortunately. We don't believe that is in the interest of the British people. I do not believe that the British people will benefit a lot from supporting dictators and torturers. Thank you, Loti, once again, and I think Sayyid Hassan wants to give us some song. It's not a new, but just to be. And before, sorry, Professor Rodney, you will be speaking after a few minutes. Thank you.
Said, with the exception of Iran, that one exception, all the governments of West Asia or the Middle East have no democratic basis. They are vicious and autocratic regimes, and the worst is Israel, which to its racism and apartheid is now adding genocide. Now, please bear with me for a moment, as you may think I'm going off the subject, but wait for it. Israel is a bit like ancient Sparta, which had a brutal military caste on top, which was suppressing an enslaved population. They were called the Helots, I think. And the Helots outnumbered the Spartans. And that was to be a very big factor in the eventual decline of Sparta. The Helots, the oppressed people, outnumbering those who were oppressing them. And so the Zionists, who are scum, should reflect on that, not only on being outnumbered, even in Israel, by Palestinians, but also they should reflect on the democratic exception in the area, which is Iran, whose annual parades commemorating the revolution have to be the biggest in the world. But on that, I could be wrong. Because you see, it is my theory, and I'm open to correction from many people here. It is my theory that as a percentage of the population on the streets, when they are able to get there, the democratic demonstrations in Bahrain are the biggest in the world as a percentage of the population available to do it. I mean, in London you get a certain percentage, but in Myanmar, I put that to you that it's in percentage terms equivalent to those demonstrations in Iran. Bahrain, as you know, is ruled by the killer Khalifas, a family with no morals, no culture, and I am informed with no table manners. Apparently they are a lot of slobs. Bahrain is tiny, yet in an extraordinary way, it seems to be at the centre of what is now unfolding in the region. That's particularly so, of course, because the American and British fleets are based in Bahrain, and both countries are backing the continuing genocide, not only in Gaza, but what is likely to be, I'm talking possibly the next few hours, which might be an even worse genocide in the south of Gaza, in the Rafah area. And then, you must then look at what is in the situation in the north of Israel. You see, there's been an evacuation of a great sliver of land along the Lebanon border. And those residents of the towns and the villages and the settlements in the north of Israel are now in the rest of Israel. And Israel has said, very rightly, that the situation can't go on. That means, it has to mean only one thing, a massive attack on Hezbollah. So you see, you've got your existing genocide, you've got the south, the Rafah situation, you've got the potential situation with Hezbollah, and you've got the biggest situation of all, which is simply that Netanyahu must continue on the policy that he's engaged on at this moment, or he'll go to prison. That's what it really gets down to. So the situation is bad, it is continuing, and it's very likely to get worse. And if and when it does get worse, and you get a widespread and extreme escalation throughout the region, Bahrain will be at the centre of it. Now, of all the peoples in the area, and I really don't want to distinguish because some very brave peoples, but the Bahraini people are brave. And I also have to say the reality, which has already been touched on by our previous speakers, the British government are highly unlikely, as things stand, to ever back the people of Bahrain. But if there is a general uprising of oppressed people of West Asia across the whole region against their tyrannical rulers, the British government might find a way to recognise one of the great trends of history, which of course eventually will happen, which will be the democratisation of the area, though at the moment, of course, it's completely oppressed and stifled. And it's only in those circumstances where you get all the regimes crumbling that I think that the British government will change its policy. I mean, its policy is basically, as you know full well, the same technique as the Romans used and the British Empire used, which is you make a deal with the local elite and you protect the local elite, and it is the local elite that does the suppression of the mass of the peoples. Now, I remember, as everybody else here does, the events of 2011, when the Doughty people were, they were slaughtered, and there was a reference here to people being blinded. Well, that was the one of the nasty practices. I mean, death is bad, but it was just using shotguns to shoot people just to blind them. That was one of the tricks they were up to on the Pearl Square revolution. And we're never ever going to forgive the killer caliphs for that. And just a quick word, Saeed, to what you said early on. The word arraign is a technical word. And simply what it means is that you vow that at some stage you'll get those bastards up in a criminal court and you will prosecute them and you'll send them down for longer than the 23 years which that young lad was put down for doing, probably for just shouting in the street. One last thing, it's absolutely disgusting that at this moment that there's no member of the Conservative Party and no member of the hierarchy of the Labour Party which is prepared to stand and use the crucial word in the overall situation, which is genocide. That the House of Commons should hang its head in shame. I'm flabbergasted. I just can't believe what's going on, but there you are. However, I can finish on perhaps a slightly brighter note, because we have to look at something a bit brighter in what is a pretty grim situation. And that is what might happen in the Rochdale by-election. When I heard there was a by-election and I heard that George Galloway was standing, I thought, well, I'll put a bet and I'll get probably 20 to 1 or 40 to 1, and I'll put £20 on at 20 to 1. And because I don't know anything about betting, I'll put £40 on the even longer odds. Well, so I went to the bookmaker, and they didn't seem to have even heard that there was a by-election, so I couldn't put a bet on. But the next day I went to another bookmaker, and to my astonishment, the only odds I got were 7 to 2, which is 3.5 to 1. And when I got home, I looked the odds up, and they were down to 2 to 1. And if you try betting, you won't get 2 to 1. So we can look forward to one MP who, without any doubt, will unequivocally use the word genocide. No ifing, no butting. And he has a very, very sharp and comprehensive understanding of the situation. And I do commend his programme on Wednesdays and Sundays at 7 o'clock. It's called Moats, Mother of All Talk Shows. And his monologue at the start of that show, which is usually about 10 to 15 minutes, is perhaps the most informative and up-to-date monologue, sorry, not monologue, information, that you will get anywhere on the internet, and I do commend that. Okay, so that's something to look forward, but the future of Bahrain really depends, I think, on that overall uprising. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Rodney, for these words. And maybe you will share with me some of your betting. I hope how much you put? £40 or?
I will. Give me a suitable charity, and I'll donate half my winnings, which will be £140, so £70.
We'll pray for a win. Thank you, Rodney, and thank you all. The floor is open now. We have on the line our friend Stephen Bell. Are you in a mood to say a few words, or?
People and in Bahrain, and it is the action of people in Yemen who, despite horrifying conditions, come out on the streets regularly for the people of Palestine and show us how we must never give in to our feelings of distress or disappointment, and must continue to act in support of the Palestinians. And I continue to take inspiration from the courage of the Bahraini people who, after 13 years of renewed repression, absolutely refuse to surrender to the repression and continue to insist on the necessity of freedom. So thank you very much for this opportunity to say a few words, and thank you for all the speakers today for informing us further of the struggle of Bahrainis and why we must continue to defend it.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Stephen. Stephen is a lifelong trade unionist. He is outside London, he lives there, but he has always supported good causes of Palestine, of Bahrain. He's always there at the forefront of protests in Westminster and also at seminars and conferences. I don't know if anybody wants to say something. Jalal, do you have something to say?
I'll leave the others.
Okay. Karen, please.
I'd just like to say to our friend Ali Abdi Imam, when he said the regime never got overthrown by a website, don't believe it. Ayatollah Khomeini made a lot of recordings which helped get rid of the regime of the Shah. And remember that the pen is mightier than the sword, so we can update a little bit now. The internet is mightier than the Kalashnikov. And people who've been writing, they've built themselves a statue that's more enduring than bronze, so don't lose heart. And I was talking to my friend Ali Mushema before the meeting, and I said, well, we've been fighting a good fight. And he said, oh, a long time, 13 years. Well, don't lose heart. 13 years might not be so long. Remember, the people of Southern Sudan fought for independence for 20 years. The people of the Western Sahara are still struggling for 49 years. The people of East Timor struggled for 24 years. So you'll win eventually. These things take time. And just to go to the case of the West, well, the West, they never really do anything about repression until something hits them in the face that they can't ignore. And I refer here to Iraq and Saddam Hussein. Everybody knew he was a tyrant, but until he did something totally out of order with Halabja, nobody took any notice. So I sincerely hope and pray it doesn't happen in Bahrain. But if the Al Khalifa regime does do something totally out of order, it's only then that they're going to wake up. So I don't want to talk too much. Everybody here knows more than I do about Bahrain. But I know that the Bahraini people, Saeed and Ali Mushema and everyone here, I know you'll fight. And you'll fight no matter how long it takes, how difficult it gets, or how lonely it becomes. So,
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. Anyone would like to say something?
Well, I only want to say something because I'm rather ignorant of the situation. I've read the Human Rights Watch report and I've listened to the statements and videos today, and I'm pretty horrified by what's going on. And the puzzle that is in my mind is how does a regime that's so repressive and so cruel, how does it justify, if you know what I mean, its activities compared with the Israeli regime? Now we know that the Israelis are driven by a nasty document called the Talmud, which says that it's perfectly okay to kill people, to deceive people, to murder and steal their land and so on. What is the equivalent in Bahrain? What is the regime driven by? Why are they behaving that way? Is there a simple solution, or is it just a matter of that particular rogue regime behaving like a bunch of vandals?
Thank you very much. Ali, do you want to comment on his question? What motivates, what drives the regime to do what it's doing?
Yes, but before that, I'll just comment on the comments I received. I believe in the word, and I believe that the word can do a lot of change, but my expression was a metaphor, but also the Iranian Revolution gave the other regimes a lesson in how to protect themselves from the people revolution or from people when they uprising. That's why we have around 5 security divisions in Bahrain. We have the Royal Guard, we have the National Guard, we have the Army, we have the Ministry of Interior, and we have the NSA. So all of them are just to protect the royal family. So it will be hard, but yes, you can start with the word. I mean, the word is a powerful thing to use it as a weapon, but my view is it's not everything. It's the beginning, but again, you will need other resources and other tools to achieve the change. I'm not saying overthrowing, but to achieve the change. Yeah, about the motivation of the regime. The regime have an absolute hand on everything in the country, on the oil, on the wealth, on the people themselves. So if you are coming to challenge them and tell them that I want part of this wealth or part of this oil, or I want to have justice in the wealth, no regime in the world or in the history will give it to you just because you asked for it. They will always deny, they will always claim that we have the rightful from God, from church, from whatever
Exactly.
things they will refer to support their existing, either it's religion thing or it's social thing. They will always maintain their interest. They will not give it just because you asked for it. So that's why you need to build up, and again, it's back to you need to build tools and the resources to challenge this regime, not to convince them, because regime will not convince that they need to give people their rights, but to challenge them and force them to give the rights to the people. This is my view.
But may I come back on that? Because Colonel Gaddafi also had oil and gold, and he was bending over backwards to help the people. He wanted to help the whole of Africa by giving them gold coinage, and yet he was demonized by the West and made to look as though he was a nasty dictator, when in fact he wasn't. And he was a Muslim, and therefore, I don't know about the caliphs, but I would assume that that kind of characteristic in what was labelled a dictator doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to misbehave in the way that the caliphs are doing. In other words, if they've got a sentient of humanity, they might be changed. I don't know.
But James, haven't you heard the famous statement that power tends to corrupt? Absolute power corrupts absolutely, and that I think is the explanation for the caliphs.
I agree, but again, there are regimes which don't submit to that diktat, as it
Oh, I don't, but that, no.
So, well,
We're Democrats.
I still don't understand what's driving them. I mean, are they Muslim people? They are.
Well, I believe that religion does not change you. If you are not ready from within, no religion, no Islam, Christianity, you may become very good Muslim, very good Christian, but if you are corrupt inside, nobody can change you. I think it is us who are ready, who are the element of change, who are the catalyst of change. Are you a good person or not a good person? Are you greedy? Are you by nature oppressive, repressive? Are you harsh? Are you kind? This is why we have to repair ourselves, to re-educate ourselves, reformulate our attention and our priorities. And this is why in the Quran it says that God will not change the welfare of the people unless they change themselves. So you have to change. We have to change from ourselves. And before we finish, I'd just like to thank everybody for their contribution, for their presence.
Sorry, one more thing.
Okay.
Could I focus? It's clear that the Bahrain regime is sponsored by the UK and America, because we're using them as a base for our military. But surely, is the Zionist regime also having an influence? It seems as though they sometimes, the Bahrainis sometimes have shown sympathy with the Palestinians by allowing them to have an embassy in Bahrain, for example. So it's not that clear, but I would like to, I assume that the Israeli regime is poisoning all the Arab countries if they can, and I think
If they
Bahrain
can,
is
yeah,
one of them,
precisely.
in extremeness. Is that likely to be true?
Well, my personal belief is that the case of Palestine itself altogether is influencing the Arab world. The resistance of the Palestinians is giving everybody in the Arab world lessons in resistance, in pro-democracy activism, okay, in liberation. On the other hand, the existence of the Israeli regime also gives the regimes the way to how to repress, how to remove and deny the people their rights. So it is definitely the case. The case for the past 75 years, the Arab world has been polarized in this situation. That most people, most Arab people, almost everybody in the Arab world, among the people, are supporting the Palestinians, and almost most of the Arab regimes have either kept quiet or went along with the American plan and the British plan. So it is true. It is true. Anyway, we are hopeful. We can never live without hope. All of you, all of us, we have to live with hope inside us to change to the better, to change the world, not to change only ourselves, but to change, to contribute, to help the dispossessed, the oppressed. This is our duty. We had helped the whole world at the end, helped the people of South Africa when they rose against the apartheid regime. Before that, the regime in South Africa was relying on the support coming from Israel, not only from Israel, but also from America and Britain.
And
they
this
supported it until the last minute. Right. Only in the late 80s that they changed their mind and supported. Nobody called for Nelson Mandela to be freed from jail until he was freed in the last 2 years of Mrs. Thatcher's government that we started to hear about Mandela. Anyway, there is always an opportunity for the oppressed people to gain their rights, to gain their freedom, to gain their liberation, provided they don't go to sleep. They have to be aware all the time. They have to be at the forefront of events. They have to sacrifice. Without sacrifice, you cannot get anything. And our people have sacrificed a lot. The people of Bahrain are still sacrificing. They are still letting their sons and their children of 13, 14, 15, 20 years of age go to the street every day until today. So that is a form of sacrifice. The best of our society are in jail. When we are talking about Hassan Mushayma, who is 76 years of age, how old? And then we talk about young people who were arrested recently of 14 and 15. When you have about 70 or 60 years of age difference between the youngest and the eldest in behind bars, then it shows that the people are willing to give, to sacrifice. And this gives us a lot of hope to go forward. So with these words, we would like to finish. Okay, I will let.
Because we're talking about politics, we're talking about regimes. Nobody mentioned money. And money is the main culprit in that situation. Because we're talking about oil, we're talking about resources, and that's what America, Great Britain take care of. And that's why they are manipulating the other countries. Yes. To actually have the hand on resources. So for me, the very important part of the whole situation is the money and who's got that money and who's earning money on the war. Because peace doesn't earn you money. Peace doesn't bring money.
Yeah.
But do you want to say a word, final word? Money definitely.
Just from the Palestinians, I saw an interview with a Palestinian activist, and the interviewer asked him, "Don't you despair?" And the Palestinian replied, "Madam, we cannot give ourselves the luxury of despair."
No despair. Let us all have hope and no despair in our lives. Thank you very much, and let us see you at other functions in the future. Thank you.
Thanks,